You step into the ancient temple, the air thick with incense and mystery. The flickering torches cast shadows on the stone walls, revealing symbols of power and eternity. At the far end of the room, a statue of Inanna looms, her obsidian eyes gleaming with an eerie awareness. Her form is both fierce and alluring, draped in robes that ripple like water. A deep, irresistible pull brought you here, though you can't explain why. As you approach the statue, the torches flicker even more wildly as the air turns colder. And then from the shadow behind the statue, she emerges. Inanna, alive and radiant, she exudes an otherworldly presence. Her eyes shimmer with the light of distant stars. Her gaze pierces you, exposing your deepest desires, your hidden fears. In her presence, you feel the weight of the love you seek, the power you crave, the knowledge you yearn for, all swirling within you. The air hums with her power as she moves closer, her presence both overwhelming and intoxicating. A silent understanding passes between you. The path ahead will be difficult, demanding more than you can yet comprehend. But the pull is too strong, the need too great. You know you will follow her, no matter the cost. Inanna's expression shifts, a faint knowing smile playing on her lips as she turns and disappears once more into the shadows. Without hesitation, you step forward, following her into the unknown. For you have met Inanna, and nothing will ever be the same. Hello and welcome to Ladies of Lore. I'm your favourite mythologist's favourite mythologist, and I'm here to take you deep into legends, myths and stories of mythological women who have shaped cultures across the world. If you're new to the podcast, welcome on in. I hope you really enjoy it here. If you're returning back, thanks for coming back. Hello, welcome back. Can you believe we are on episode 4 already? I've been doing this for a month now, and I am genuinely enjoying this so much, and I really hope that you guys can tell how much I'm having a great time, and I hope you're having a great time too. I hope you're enjoying it. Today we're talking all about Inanna, the Sumerian goddess of love, war and transformation. Inanna was revered across Mesopotamia as a deity of immense power and complexity. She embodies the dualities of life, love and conflict, fertility and death. Again, we're seeing the duality here. We need to start kind of like a bingo for these mythological women, because duality seems to be a running theme. As usual, we'll go through her origins in the ancient world, take a little look at some of the most famous myths surrounding Inanna. Fair warning, one of them is a little bit saucy, and we'll explore how her image evolved over millennia, making her still very significant in modern culture. So grab a little blankie, grab a little drink and a snacky, and let's dig in. Inanna is the most famous but probably least understood of all of the Sumerian goddesses. Also known as the Lady of Heaven, Inanna is a patron of sexuality and aggression, fertility and battle. But before we really crack on, I'll tell you a little bit about the Sumerians so you have a better idea of the wider context that Inanna existed within. The Sumerians were South Mesopotamian people whose civilization existed between around 4100 to 1750 BCE. Mesopotamia was an ancient region which today corresponds with Iraq, parts of Iran, Syria, Kuwait, and Turkey. And the Sumerians were actually responsible for quite a lot of important inventions, innovations, and concepts. They were the first to divide day and night into 12-hour periods, hours into 60 minutes, and minutes into 60 seconds. It has been said that there were 39 world firsts by the Sumerians, and I won't read all 39, but here are some of my favourites. Ever left a shiny apple on a teacher's desk? Sumerians did it first. The very first love song came straight from the Sumerians, and the very first aquarium was a Sumerian aquarium. Say that 3 times quickly. So I think you'll agree when I say the Sumerians were very influential people. And for the people of Sumer, some 3,000 to 4,000 years ago, Inanna was actually already an ancient goddess. Although her origins are quite unclear, a bit like the Morrigan, there are 2 possible theories as to where she came from before she was adopted by the Sumerians. The first possibility is that she emerged as a deity within the polytheistic Semitic groups of the Near East around 3,500 to 4,000 BCE, and then was eventually adopted by the Sumerians to fill in some gaps in their pantheon, taking on roles that hadn't already been designated as the domain of existing gods and goddesses. And the second theory is that Inanna was a syncretic goddess, so that's one who was formed as a blend of the characteristics of several already existing deities. So it is a little bit unclear as to where she really originated from, but to Sumerians, Inanna's story begins in the fertile plains of ancient Mesopotamia, in a region known as the cradle of civilization. And she was one of the central figures in the Sumerian pantheon, worshipped as the Queen of Heaven. Her primary city was Uruk, one of the earliest urban centres in the world, and it was here where her temple, the Inanna, or the House of Heaven, stood as testament to her significance. Inanna's domain was vast. She was the goddess of love and beauty, overseeing aspects of life related to passion and sexuality and fertility. But not only this, Inanna was also a furious goddess of war and justice, and she embodied the ferocity and power needed to defend her people and maintain order. Like I said, another figure of duality, much like the other women we've spoken about so far in this series. And isn't it interesting to think that yet again we have this duality of goddesses and women in mythology and folklore? And it's this duality that actually makes Inanna so intriguing, because she wasn't just this gentle goddess of love, she was also a fierce warrior capable of massive destruction as well as creation. And the duality is reflected in her symbol. So her symbol is the 8-pointed star, and that represents the planet Venus, which she ruled as both the morning and evening star. And her other symbol is the lion, and that's very representative of strength and dominance. Inanna is actually often depicted in ancient art with this combination of beauty and power. She's adorned in all of these elaborate garments, but also holding weapons or standing with fierce beasts. And she's portrayed as a fiercely independent woman who does exactly what she wants, when she wants, often without regard for consequences. Iconic behaviour, if you ask me, and even more iconic when the behaviour cause issues. She just sort of manipulates or threatens or tries to seduce other people to fix her problems. Like I said, what a messy little icon, we love to see it. And that's actually the widely accepted canon of her personality. There's not really any poems or tales or legends or stories that show her in any other way other than this. Like I said, iconic. Inanna's family tree played a very large role in shaping her and her identity as this goddess of duality. Now, her mother was actually never mentioned by name. In many myths, her father was Anu, the sky god, and her brother Utu ruled the sun as god of justice, truth, and morality. Now, Inanna also had a sister, Ereshkigal, and she was actually the goddess of the underworld. And she stayed down in the underworld while Inanna stayed above in the sky and heaven. Her lover, Dumuzi, was the shepherd god, and ultimately he actually became a sacrifice in the cosmic order of life and death. And the relationships that Inanna has with all of these family members, they underscore the interconnectedness of love and power and sacrifice in Inanna's story. Inanna always appears as a young woman in her early 20s. As a goddess of femininity and fertility, she's often naked, and symbols such as a bundle of reeds or a gatepost further represent her influence on fertility and procreation. Now, on the other hand, as also being a goddess of war, she often wears full battle armour armed with bow and arrows or other weapons in her hand or around her. And in some of these images, she's riding a lion. And I think that's really bloody cool. She's just out there riding lions, taking names, seducing anyone that disagrees with her. I'm for it. I'm all for Inanna. And here's another little interesting nugget for you. As well as being the goddess of sex, Inanna also had a cult of trans and or non-binary followers called the Gala. And they worshipped at her temple, sang lamentations and spoke a Sumerian dialect called Emersal, which was possibly usually only reserved for women. Now, scholars have suggested quite a lot of different things about the Gala, including that they were men who dressed as women and took female names, that they were women who took male names, that they were castrated men, that they were male sex workers, or they were a diverse mix of gender and sexuality. So it's kind of covering all bases there, but they were most definitely not conforming to stereotypical gender norms. And some scholars have actually theorised that priests of Inanna were similar to those that the people of India now refer to as Herja. And there was once a theory that these priests engaged in sacred prostitution, but modern scholars have kind of rejected this idea, and I'm glad they have. So now you know a little bit about Inanna, let's explore a few of her stories. There are many legends associated with Inanna, including a particularly charming one in which she gets her dad very, very drunk and then steals the concepts of wisdom and culture from him while he's passed out. What a little legend. The first myth that sheds a bit of light on Inanna's character is Inanna and the Halapu tree. And this one is a bit lesser known, but it's deeply symbolic. It begins with the Halapu tree, which Inanna finds by the banks of the Euphrates River. And she nurtures this tree, intending to use its wood to create her throne and her bed, which are kind of symbols of power and fertility. However, the tree becomes home to three creatures: a snake, the Anzu bird, and Lilith, a demon or spirit of the night. Inanna is unable to get rid of these intruders, and so she calls upon Gilgamesh, which is the hero of the Sumerian legend, the Epic of Gilgamesh. And if you've not read that, it's massive, but it is very, very interesting. So Gilgamesh comes along and he strikes the tree with his sword and drives away these creatures, and Inanna can finally use the wood as she intended. It's quite a short story, but it does highlight Inanna's role as a nurturer and protector, but it also reveals that sometimes Inanna might need to rely on other people, even mortals like Gilgamesh. And the tree itself is rich with symbolism. It represents life and growth and the connection between heaven and earth, but it also becomes the site of a struggle and conflict. And the presence of Lilith in the tree adds kind of another layer of meaning, as Lilith is often associated with rebellion and independence. In this myth, we see Inanna's determination and resourcefulness, but also her acknowledgements of the limits of her power. There's also a little spicy tale about an encounter between Inanna and her lover Dumuzi. And this one is a great example of our ancestors just being horny on main, really. And in the story, Inanna's brother, the sun god Utu, has encouraged her to marry Dumuzi, and their courtship is actually one of the oldest love poems from the ancient worlds. It's a story of love between gods. It was translated from an ancient tablet by Diane Wolkstein and Samuel Noah Kramer. And I'm not going to read you the whole thing, but I'll give you a little taster of the vibes you can expect if you do fancy reading it all. And this is a very quotable story, so I'm going to give you a few lines that stand out for me, that kind of give you the flavour of what to expect. As for me, Inanna, who will plough my vulva? Who will plough my high field? Who will station the ox there? Like I said, it's pretty racy, it's pretty saucy, and an image that I really love to think about is the scribe that had to carve this story onto the tablet. It's just wonderful. It truly is the ancient equivalent of if you post something on the internet, it's going to be there forever. Now, I like to make this podcast a treasure trove of goodies, so if you really want to get the full impact of this poem, I've left you a little present in the show notes in the form of a link to a full performance of the poem Vulva and All. And this performance is from 1988, and playing the role of Inanna is actually Diane Wolkstein herself, the person who translated it. Now, I've watched the whole thing. It was a delight. It was such an experience. So I'm going to leave that link in the show notes for you, and I'll also leave you the link to the full text in the show notes as well. But fair warning, it's full of very erotic cream and cheese innuendo, so you might need a cold shower afterwards. Honey cheese aside, perhaps the most famous of Inanna's myths is the descent of Inanna. And this myth is not just a tale of a goddess's journey to the underworld, it's actually a profound exploration of themes like power, vulnerability, death, and rebirth. And the story begins with Inanna deciding to visit her recently widowed sister Ereshkigal, the queen of the underworld, accompanied by her loyal servant Ninjabur. Now, Inanna dresses to impress on this trip. She wears all of her finest regalia. She has the crown of heaven on her head, beads around her neck, her beautiful, intricate breastplate, golden ring, and she carries with her her scepter, the rod of power. Just before she reaches the underworld, I think she has a bit of intuition, and she gives Ninjabur instructions on how to come to her aid if she actually doesn't come back when she's expected to. Upon her arrival at the gates of the underworld, Inanna knocks loudly and demands entrance. Neti, the chief gatekeeper, asks who she is, and when Inanna answers, "I am Inanna, Queen of Heaven," Neti asks why she would wish to enter the land from which no traveller returns. Inanna answers, because of my older sister, Ereshkigal. Her husband, Gugulana, the bull of heaven, has died. I have come to witness the funeral rites. You'd think her sister would be happy to see her, but Ereshkigal was not happy with this unexpected visit, and she tells Nettie to bolt the 7 gates of the underworld against Inanna, and then let her in 1 gate at a time. At each gate, Inanna has to remove 1 piece of her divine regalia until she finally reaches her sister. And when Inanna walks into Ereshkigal's throne room, naked and alone, there is no happy reunion. There is no sisterly love. Instead, and this is a quote taken directly from the story, Ereshkigal fastened on Inanna the eye of death. She spoke against her the word of wrath. She uttered against her the cry of guilt. She struck her. Inanna was turned into a corpse, a piece of rotting meat, and was hung from a hook on the wall. Yes, you heard that right. She killed her and hung her on a hook on the wall. You might think that this is a bit of an overreaction, but there's actually a little bit of context that you might want to know, and it might make you reconsider Ereshkigal's actions. So Inanna was actually responsible for the death of Ereshkigal's husband. And the full story of this is really, really interesting, but I'm going to give you the too long don't read version. But after essentially being called out for having a long list of ex-lovers by Gilgamesh, Inanna begs her father to give her the bull of heaven to exact her revenge. And her father consents to this and brings the bull up from the underworld, where he kills 300 innocent men before ultimately being murdered by Gilgamesh. And that is why his funeral is taking place. And I'm not one for slut shaming, I think that's wrong, but I do think this was probably a bit of an overreaction from Inanna. But either way, you can see why Ereshkigal didn't really want Inanna at the funeral. So Ninshubur waits for 3 days and 3 nights until she finally goes to Inanna's father for help. She is sent to Gala, the genderless beings I mentioned earlier on, and they are there to help return Inanna from the underworld. And they enter the underworld with ease, and they pass through the gates and find Ereshkigal deep in labour, with Inanna's body hanging from the wall. And the Gala takes sympathy with Ereshkigal's pain, and she, in gratitude, offers them whatever gift they ask for. And as ordered, they respond, "We wish only the corpse that hangs from the hook on the wall." And Ereshkigal gives it to them. The Gala then go on to revive Inanna with food and water of life, and she rises back from the dead. And I know you all didn't think it would be so easy to just rise from the dead and leave the underworld, and much like in other mythologies, someone has to be found to take up Inanna's place in the underworld. At first, demons try to take Ninshubur and then go on to try and take other members of Inanna's family, and even her beautician. She had a beautician. Who doesn't? If that's not a slay, I don't know what is. But Inanna actually stops this, because all of these people that the demons try to take are wearing clothes of mourning. And just as Inanna thinks she won't find a replacement, she comes across none other than Dumuzi, her lover, and provider of the very best cream. And unlike the others, Dumuzi is dressed in his finest clothes, sitting upon his shiny throne. Inanna is absolutely not down to be embarrassed in this way. Why isn't he mourning her like everybody else is? It just doesn't make sense to her. And in the ultimate petty revenge for this, she orders the demons to take him down to the underworld. And Dumuzi tries to escape, turns himself into a snake, but ultimately he's caught and he's taken down to the underworld. And in a last-minute offer, Dumuzi's sister volunteers herself to go in his place. And this offer is partially accepted, and there's a bit of negotiation, and it's eventually agreed that Dumuzi will spend half of the year in the underworld, and his sister will spend the other half in the underworld. And thus, the seasons were born, a little bit like the Greek story of Demeter and Persephone. And this myth is really striking as it portrays Inanna's vulnerability. Despite being this powerful goddess, even she can't escape the forces of death and the underworld. Her death at the hands of her sister can almost be interpreted as a bit of a transformation or evolution, and the exchange of Inanna for Dumuzi symbolises this cycle of life and death, fertility and barrenness that Inanna governs over. And the myth of Inanna's descent has been interpreted as an allegory for the agricultural cycle, the death of the old year and the rebirth of the new. And it also kind of speaks to the universal human experience, really, of suffering, loss, eventual renewal. And we do get to see Inanna's personality shine through in her absolute petty revenge on Dumuzi. She just says, do you know what? If you're not going to mourn me, you can get down there in my place. Go on. I don't care about your cheese. I don't care about your cream. Get down in the underworld. All he had to do really was look sad, but he couldn't manage it. But it is really a fascinating exploration of Inanna's personality and represents everything that she stands for, but also shows her weaknesses as well. So how have interpretations of Inanna changed throughout time? Well, Inanna was actually very influential on other ancient cultures. As Sumerian culture blended with Akkadian influences, Inanna became known as Ishtar. Now, Ishtar had many of Inanna's characteristics. She was still the goddess of love and beauty and war, but there were shifts in how she was worshipped and portrayed. And Ishtar became more closely associated with warfare and political power, reflecting the changing values and the priorities of the time. And it's the same as when we discuss Medusa. Again, we're looking at this person through a different cultural lens. And elements of Inanna and Ishtar's myth were also absorbed into other cultures and religious traditions even further afield. For instance, the Greek goddess Aphrodite, who's often most closely associated with love and beauty, has been seen to be a distant descendant of Inanna and Ishtar. But Aphrodite kind of lacks those aspects of war and instead focuses on the softer aspects of Inanna and Ishtar. And again, like I said, we see these changes that are reflective of the cultural lens we're looking through. Different cultures choose to focus on different elements of Inanna. And as monotheism began to rise in the Near East, the worship of deities like Inanna and Ishtar declined, but the stories and symbols associated with them never disappeared, and they continue to crop up in literature and art and cultural memory. Remember, we have this cultural exchange like La Llorona. These stories are told over and over again, and although they might lose their religious meaning, they still hold massive cultural significance. And elements of Inanna's myth were reinterpreted or integrated into new religious frameworks, and it's even been suggested that Inanna influenced parts of the Bible, such as the stories of Eve or the Queen of Heaven from the book of Jeremiah. And it's really clear that even if Inanna was no longer relevant in a religious capacity, she was still highly influential, even in ancient times. But what about Inanna in modern culture, I hear you ask? Well, Inanna's image has undergone significant reinterpretation in modern times, and scholars, artists, and spiritual seekers have revisited her myths, finding new meanings and applications for her story in more contemporary contexts. In recent years, Inanna has experienced new levels of interest, especially in feminist theology and literature, much again like Medusa. Her stories highlight these themes of power and sexuality and transformation, and it resonates strongly with modern audiences, especially women, who see in Inanna a figure of strength and resilience. Scholars have reinterpreted Inanna's myths as expressions of the struggles and triumphs of women, much like the way Medusa has become a symbol for female rage. Inanna's descent into the underworld can be seen as kind of a metaphor for personal journeys of suffering and renewal that many, many women experience, and her ability to confront death and return to life symbolises the power of the feminine spirit to endure and overcome even the most daunting challenges, much like Medusa. In literature, Inanna's been reimagined as a complex, multi-dimensional figure who defies traditional gender roles. Authors like Diane Wolkstein, who translated and retold Inanna's myths in her book Inanna, Queen of Heaven and Earth, have brought her stories to a much wider audience, emphasising her relevance to contemporary issues of gender and identity. Inanna's also appeared in modern poetry, novels and visual art, where she's often a symbol of feminine power and independence. And these modern interpretations of Inanna reflect a growing recognition of the importance of ancient goddesses and myths in shaping our understanding of gender and power today. And Inanna has had a bit of a resurgence, really, in a spiritual capacity in modern times, particularly amongst those who want to embrace goddess worship or the divine feminine, a bit like we saw with the Morrigan. She's also part of rituals and meditations aimed at personal empowerment, healing and transformation. The themes of her stories provide such a rich source of inspiration for those seeking to connect with the deeper aspects of their own lives and experiences. And in some spiritual traditions, Inanna is seen as a guide for navigating the complexities of emotions and relationships, offering wisdom and strength to those who call upon her. And the spiritual realm aside, Inanna has actually become a bit of a cultural icon in popular media, and her image appears everywhere from music and film, fashion and visual art, and she's often depicted much the same as she was in ancient times, as a powerful, independent figure who embodies the creative and destructive forces of nature. And that duality again makes her such a compelling figure for artists and creators who are drawn to this complex character and all of that rich symbolism associated with her myths. Inanna challenges the traditional binaries that often limit how we understand gender roles and the divine, and that makes her really relevant in discussions today about the fluidity of identity. And as such, Inanna has become associated with many members of the transgender community, and that's largely down to the gender non-conformity of her early priests. Author Sarah Amis describes a ritual of Inanna, and she says, Inanna removes the symbols of womanhood and consecrates a maiden's heart as a male, and then does the same with a man, granting each the role and status of another gender by divine intervention, and simultaneously inducting them into her priesthood. And you know what? We love a sex-positive trans ally queen. And finally, thanks to her ability to command men to do her bidding, Inanna is often represented in the BDSM community. And I'll leave the rest of that to your imaginations because, quite frankly, we've done enough ploughing for one day. As we've explored in this episode, Inanna is far more than just an ancient goddess. She's a timeless symbol of the complexities of human experiences. Her myths of love, power, sacrifice, and rebirth have echoed through the ages, influencing cultures and spiritual practices all over the world. Inanna's ability to embrace and embody opposites, love and war, beauty and terror, make her a powerful figure for understanding both the divine and the human condition. Whether she's a goddess worshipped in the temples of ancient Uruk or a modern symbol of feminine strength and transformation, Inanna's legacy continues to both challenge and inspire. I really hope today's journey through the life and myths of Inanna have given you a deeper appreciation and understanding of this truly fascinating goddess. And if you found today's episode extra intriguing, I've put some links in the show notes, as per usual, to lots of the things that I've mentioned and lots of the different pieces of information that I've used to create this episode. So do go ahead and have a little read and let me know what you think in the comments. Thank you so very much for listening. If you've enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to follow wherever you're listening. And if you want to be an absolute babe, just let somebody know who might enjoy Ladies of Law how to find the podcast. Be sure to tune in next week as we unravel another thread in the rich tapestry of mythology. Until then, may your vulvas be ploughed and your honey cheese be in abundance.